my superpower based on that is I'm a lifelong learner. So one of the best compliments I ever got was from a very young CFO. He was like 27, 28 years old, running a multi-million-dollar company. And we were doing a mastermind. We were in the same mastermind, and he was just a brilliant individual. And at the end of like 3 or 4 days, he called me out and said, "You are the only person I know who has as much experience and lifetime under your belt who is still asking questions of people my age." And I really took that to heart because it's true. I know that I can learn from everyone. It doesn't matter if you're 22 and you're a hairdresser or whatever. And it's the same reason why I've been able to pivot and shift so many times, because I'm not afraid to learn, and I'm not afraid to be the dumbest person in the room. And by the way,
not afraid to be bad at something.
Right. And I think I'm a smart person, and I have a good friend of mine, Philip, and he says, the first time you do something, if you're not embarrassed, you're not doing it right. And it's a good lesson. So I really do think that has kept me humble, and that it keeps you young, honestly, because I am constantly excited about, maybe too much, about different opportunities, things that people are doing, and seeing the positive on that side. And I think we get old, and I think we get stuck when we stop learning, and when we start thinking we have nothing to gain from someone else, especially someone who looks entirely different from us. So I am proud of that. I do think that's a superpower.
Heroes are an inspiring group of people. Every one of them, from the larger-than-life comic book heroes you see on the big silver screen, to everyday heroes that let us live the privileged lives we do. Every hero has a story to tell, from the doctor saving lives at your local hospital, to the war veteran down the street who risked his life for our freedom, to the police officers and the firefighters who risk their safety to ensure ours. Every hero is special, and every story worth telling. But there is one class of heroes that I think is often ignored: the entrepreneur, the creator, the producer, the ones who look at the problems in this world and think to themselves, you know what, I can fix that. I can help people. I can make a difference. Then they go out and do exactly that by creating a new product or introducing a new service. Some go on to change the world. Others make a world of difference to their customers. Welcome to The Hero Show. Join us as we pull back the masks on the world's finest heropreneurs and learn the secrets to their powers, their success, and their influence, so you can use those secrets to attract more sales, make more money, and experience more freedom in your business. I'm your host, Richard Matthews, and we are on in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to The Hero Show. My name is Richard Matthews, and today I have live on the line with me Jennifer Grimson. Jennifer, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So glad to have you here. And we'll get in a little bit to your bio in a second. But for those of you who follow along with our podcast, my wife and I are back out of Acadia in the north. We're down in Pennsylvania again on our way back down south for our travels. And Jennifer, where are you coming in from today?
Nashville, Tennessee.
Awesome. I loved Nashville. My son really liked the Pantheon when we were there, because he's sort of obsessed with Greek mythology, or was at that time. And that was a cool town to be in when we went through there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You can't come to Nashville, you can't have a bad time in this town. There's so much to do.
Yeah, and we went there for a business meeting one time, and it was downtown, and we got to go all through the downtown stuff and take the Ubers everywhere. It's like, in the middle of the night, at 3 a.m., you could get an Uber to pick you up and take you down to a music place that was still open and still serving food and still doing music. And I was like, that's crazy, because, we're from small town America where, they roll up the sidewalks at 6 o'clock.
Yeah. And I don't know when you were here last, but it's during COVID, so much has built up down there. And we used to go, we live very close to downtown. So we used to go all the time. We went down for the first time the other night. It's like a whole new city again. But yeah, Nashville's so unique in that cool sense. Like there's always music, there's always something, it's always open, it's always accessible. So it's a pretty easy place to live.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing that it's all different, we may have to go back and visit some more. Mm-hmm. So what I want to do real quick is go through your bio so people who are listening know who you are. So Jennifer Grimson was a single mother who lost everything twice. Second time, she rebuilt by creating small empires for financial independence. She's created over $1.4 million in income, producing investments with nothing more than a W-2 and grit. In 2020, Jennifer created the Micro Empires podcast to share her story and to pull back the curtain on the path to financial independence. So with that brief introduction, Jennifer, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you're known for now, what your business is like, and who do you serve?
I think what I'm known for, honestly, and this is going to sound really broad, but I'm really known for creating something out of nothing. So I did that in my corporate career, where I would open new markets for businesses. And I've done it in my personal life, where I can start at zero and just create something from nothing through the power of just learning and, honestly, grit, just keeping going. And once you get in the right direction. Who I work with right now. So the podcast was a vehicle to not just tell my story, but to share. I mean, my story isn't over. I'm still seeking financial independence. So it's me sharing the journey along the way and all the tools that I'm learning, because there's always tools to build wealth that are somewhat of a quote secret. And they shouldn't be, and they're available to all of us. So just kind of pulling back that curtain and being identifiable enough to people that they think, I am not a financial expert. I'm not a real estate guru. I'm none of those things. I'm just a person who's trying to build wealth. And especially after I lost everything twice. So, and the second time I was 41 years old. So it's not like, I got a head start at 23 years old. So I just try, I think I'm known for that. And I'm also known for the fact that it's never too late to start or to learn. And to be a part and to sort of take your place and take, stand in your place and claim what's yours and what you want to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the creation from nothing. I actually took Greek and Hebrew in college, so I could learn to read the Bible in the original scripts. And the term, I believe, in Greek is ex nihilo, which means to create from nothing.
Wow.
And it's considered a divine power to be able to create from nothing. So anyways, it's a cool way to look at yourself in terms of superpowers, the ability to create from nothing. And so what I want to find out then is your origin story, right? Every good comic book hero has an origin story. It's the thing that made them into the hero they are today. We want to hear that story. Were you born a hero? Were you bit by a radioactive spider that made you want to get into, the income producing investments and those kind of things, or did you start in a job? And I want to sort of hear the story of losing everything twice, those kind of things. Basically, how did you get to where you are now?
It's funny because when so my show is called Micro Empires, and I talk about the fact that everything that you're doing should be considered an empire. So you have to protect it and be proud of it, right? So was I born a superhero? No, I was not born a superhero, but I certainly was born, as a kid, I had really big dreams. And I made some mistakes that I think a lot of people, especially women, make, which is I kind of turned myself over, my emotional self, my well-being, my financial well-being over to other people. That's what I did. Those were my fatal flaws.
Yeah.
I think when I became a superhero, which I don't know what my name would be, that would be hilarious, is when I woke up the second time and realized I've done this again. Because even though there were outside things that had happened, my reasons for losing everything aren't because I bought expensive clothes or had fancy cars. It's because I turned my financial well-being over to other people. But it doesn't really matter how I got there. I got there. And the common denominator was me. It was that wake-up call of the only person who's going to turn this around is me. And the only way I'm going to figure it out is to walk through the mud and to figure it out. And so that's what I decided to do. So yes, I had a corporate job. I always went and got a corporate job, but I knew that real estate would be a key to building wealth. So that was step one. And then I ultimately went into Airbnb, and that's kind of really what launched me here in Nashville. And then I started to learn about other investing opportunities, other ways to invest. And it just became clear that there were all kinds of small ways to create empires that protect you. Because even if you have a really amazing job that you love and pays you so well, if you're let go tomorrow, will you be okay in 6 months? And I wanted to create an environment where nothing could ever be taken from me again like that. I could lose a job and that would be okay. I could end a relationship and I would be okay. I could lose a real estate deal and I would be okay. So it was creating all of that. And I think my superpower, honestly, is the ability to recognize my own role in that situation because I can't point the finger at other people. And then the willingness to just keep learning. I see a lot of folks who are a lot younger than me say things like, well, I'm too old for that, or it's too late for me. And I think, well, what does it say about me? I mean, even right now, I'm developing yet another career at this stage of my life. So I guess that's probably when it would be. I hesitate to use the word superpower, but I'm certainly, I hear from my listeners that they identify with the fact of what I went through and that I stopped keeping it a secret. I had kept it a secret for a long time because there's a lot of shame around losing everything and financial chaos. So yeah,
absolutely.
This is it.
So my first thought is the idea of being able to lose a deal and be okay, or get fired from your job and be okay. And the thing it reminds me of is my listeners will recognize, I spent a lot of time reading Robert Kiyosaki's books growing up. And one of the things that he says is he doesn't count wealth as like an amount of money, but an amount of time you can survive with your current lifestyle goals. Right. So it's like whatever your lifestyle is, however long you could sustain that. If it's 100 days, you got 100 days worth of wealth. Right. If it's indefinitely, then you're financially independent. Right. And that's what it sort of strikes me as, like, it doesn't really matter what happens in your world. You could continue to maintain your current lifestyle indefinitely. That's financial independence. Right. It doesn't really matter how big the portfolio is.
Right. That's true.
Or whatever it is you're doing. So, yeah.
And Robert Kiyosaki, wrote what we call, I call it anyway, the Purple Bible, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is the beginning of anybody who wants to get into real estate, but honestly, anybody who wants to get in any kind of financial independence, because it's a mind shift. That book is what begins your mind shifting from what you believed before. But I think that's a really good point that you just made about Richard Kiyosaki, because yes, how long can I maintain this lifestyle if everything went away? And that makes you examine your lifestyle, right? So it does for me anyway. So, I never lived well above my means, but I'm just more comfortable and doing the work to discover where you really feel about money and where you feel comfortable, I think is really important. And then making sure that your partner understands it too. What you're doing right now with your family is so unique, traveling all over, but there are many people who would find that like so scary and so upsetting or so, terrifying. And it's not for you, but that's a mindset, honestly. And that's what I find with my guests. I'll interview people who grew up poor, who are terrified all the time. And interview people who grew up poor, who have no fear, because what do they have to fear? They've seen the worst. And I just think understanding what your lifestyle is so unique, but so rich for you and your family. I just think that's incredible. And I don't think a lot of people spend a lot of time doing that because we're kind of forced the American dream, which is not a real thing.
Buy a car and, do the same thing every week.
and go into serious debt.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing because I remember when I was growing my business, my first goal in my business was to hit a revenue number, right? I was like, I had this number in my head. And it's like, when I hit that number, it was a magical number. It was a really low number. It was like, I'm going to hit $100,000 a year and I'll have a real business. Yeah. And I'll finally be like financially free and all these other things. And I remember, I hadn't even quite hit that point yet. And it was a number of years ago. And I realized I was like, I didn't actually, like, I had all the money I wanted. And it was only, I think we were like $60,000 or $70,000 a year, and I could do everything I wanted. And I was like, it was a light bulb moment for me when I realized it wasn't the money that I wanted. It was, for me, it was time freedom and location freedom, and having enough money that I could do the things I wanted to do. Right. And so like the money wasn't the limiting factor. And then it was a shift for me into realizing, okay, so what do I actually want to do with my business? And having a more value-based business instead of just a goal to hit a revenue number. And then my business grew quite a bit. So it's definitely figuring out a little bit like, what is your lifestyle? What do you want? Right. And I figured out what I wanted. And my wife and I, we started traveling. And it was after we started traveling when we realized that you don't need a lot to do what we want to do. And we have so much freedom, and we have a lot of good time with our family and whatnot. But anyways, yeah, it started with figuring out what we wanted our lifestyle to look like and how long we wanted to live that. And now we know exactly what that takes, and anything else we build on top of it, it just, allows us to keep traveling and do cooler things.
Right. I think it's really important for everyone to ask themselves what their definition of wealth is, because wealth is not the best word because it's misunderstood by many people. For me, it's time and options. So wealth provides me with as much time as I want to do the things I want to do, and provides me options. So if the car breaks down or the house burns down or whatever happens, I have options. When you live in financial worry or chaos, you may not have options. You might blow a tire and there are no options. And that's what poverty is, because you're terrified all the time. And I know people who make six figures or more, mid six figures, and live without time or options because they haven't done that work around, what am I really doing? What is any of this? Is it bringing me joy? Is any of it bringing me joy? And
Marie Kondo your life.
You got to Marie Kondo your life. That's right. On a money way, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine who's got a very successful real estate business in the wholesaling space, and was doing like $200K a month in revenue. And in the wholesaling business, a lot of that is profit. So like big money he was pulling in. And I remember he called me up one day and he was like, I'm so jealous of you. And I was like, why? You make way more money than I do. And he was like, because you have the freedom that I wish I did. My business is like, I didn't think about how my business was going to impact my lifestyle before I built it.
Right.
And that's an important consideration, is to figure out what is the lifestyle whatever investment vehicles you're building, your businesses you're building, how do they affect your lifestyle? And, do they allow you to have that freedom that you're looking for?
And what's interesting to me, I work with a lot of folks that are high income earners, saved a lot of money, are ready to invest. So they're usually sort of a brand new investor and they're just getting their feet wet, because I'm not a huge risk taker. I actually am a micro risk taker. So I don't believe you need to put everything in one basket, whatever. But some folks are scraping together just enough to get started. Other folks have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. They're making six figures. They own their home outright, et cetera. They're ready to move, and they don't need to move all of it. But they won't, because of the fear. And the question I always ask is, how much money do you really need? And like you said, I mean, especially if you aren't carrying a house note and car payments, $60,000 or $70,000 a year for the average person, it was a very, very nice lifestyle after all your expenses, et cetera. But you stop believing that when you just see the big dollar signs in the bank. But it's really a shift of like, really, how much money do you actually need? And that's a hard question and a hard thing for a lot of people to look at. But I think it's very freeing once you realize it. Like your friend had that realization, he was making $2.4 million a year, and he's jealous of you because he has no freedom.
And I was like, I realized, we carry debt on this RV and we have a car, right? And we travel pretty much full time. So like we travel 3 or 4 times a month and we move all over the country. In 4 years, we've done 36 states and seen everything from, we were just in Niagara Falls the other day to New York City to, we saw killer whales in Oregon. We've done all sorts of cool stuff. And I think the whole lifestyle, everything we do costs us maybe $50,000 a year, including the debt. Right.
Well, and that's another thing I think it's really important for people to understand is there's good debt and there's bad debt, right? So good debt serves you. And right now, with interest rates so low and everything, money's on sale. It's not a bad time to be financing it. It's just to be, we just went out the other day and I never finance things anymore, really. I mean, big things, houses, obviously investments, big investments that we're making in multifamily, but it was something small. It never crossed my mind like, oh, I don't have to write a check for this. I can just finance it. And it happened to be furniture. So it could be over years without interest, et cetera. But there's good debt and there's bad debt. And if the debt serves you, then it's good. It propels you in the direction that you need to go. So leveraging those things, those are all tools of the wealthy to you buy your house and you have all this equity in it. Start using that. That should be a tool to build more wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the downsides of doing what we're doing. is because we don't have anything but what we take with us. So we don't have a house that's building equity or any of those things. So there's opportunity costs that go along with that. And I know we have allowed us to, the traveling has allowed us to take some of our dreams early, but it's also making some of the wealth building stuff a little more difficult. But that is just, it's part of the decision process we've made, and said, we were aware of that when we did it. So,
well, you don't have to live in a home to have it be an investment. So you certainly could take advantage of that and keep doing your dream. And there are ways around that. But I see what you're saying. You're the cost benefit analysis, but especially with the way that you're traveling all over the country, you're able to see every single pocket and every single opportunity that's out there.
Yeah. That's one of the things. I know you mentioned Airbnb. I'm really excited about potentially getting into Airbnb as my next sort of thing. I got a friend of mine who's got like 7 or 8 properties that does that. And I'm like, I want to get into that space just because I know some of the areas of the country that they'd be really popular because we've been there. And we know the areas and we know the kind of things that are, where there'd be a good market for them. The other one that I've been really interested in is the RV parks, because after living in them for 4 years, going all over the country, we know exactly what kind of stuff attracts us. And, families like us. And I feel like that would give us a competitive advantage in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great. Those are both great avenues to go down.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your superpowers. I know you mentioned it a little bit before, but we say on this show, every iconic hero has a superpower, right? Whether that's a fancy flying suit made by genius intellect, or the ability to call down thunder from the sky, or super strength. In the real world, heroes have what I call a zone of genius. And that's either a skill or a set of skills that you were born with or you developed over time, right? And this superpower is really what sets you apart and allows you to help your people slay their villains, so to speak, and come out on top in their own journeys. And if you think about all the skills you've built over the course of your life, there's probably one skill that is connected to all of them, right? It's the common thread that really helps you do what you do. Yeah. So with that sort of framing, what do you think your superpower is?
I think my superpower based on that is I'm a lifelong learner. So one of the best compliments I ever got was from a very young CFO. He was like 27, 28 years old, running a multi-million-dollar company. And we were doing a mastermind. We were in the same mastermind, and he was just a brilliant individual. And at the end of like 3 or 4 days, he called me out and said, "You are the only person I know who has as much experience and lifetime under your belt who is still asking questions of people my age." And I really took that to heart because it's true. I know that I can learn from everyone. It doesn't matter if you're 22 and you're a hairdresser or whatever. And it's the same reason why I've been able to pivot and shift so many times, because I'm not afraid to learn, and I'm not afraid to be the dumbest person in the room. And by the way,
not afraid to be bad at something.
Right. And I think I'm a smart person, and I have a good friend of mine, Philip, and he says, the first time you do something, if you're not embarrassed, you're not doing it right. And it's a good lesson. So I really do think that has kept me humble, and that it keeps you young, honestly, because I am constantly excited about, maybe too much, about different opportunities, things that people are doing, and seeing the positive on that side. And I think we get old, and I think we get stuck when we stop learning, and when we start thinking we have nothing to gain from someone else, especially someone who looks entirely different from us. So I am proud of that. I do think that's a superpower.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of constantly learning. One of my favorite, mental exercises is, when the fruit ripens, like once it's ripe, then it starts to rot. So right. If you never want to get ripe, but you always want to be ripening. And that's the way I've always thought about learning. And so I've always got something in my life that I'm working on learning. Right. And so over the last couple of years, it's been things like, I got a piano sitting here next to me, and I was like, I got my business going, and I was like, I'm going to pick up the piano. And like 6 weeks later, I was, started reading music with the piano. My wife hated me for it. She took me years to get that good. And I picked up drawing last year and started learning to draw. And then this year, my son and I are doing a 3D modeling. We're learning to do 3D modeling. And I've convinced my wife and my son that if my son and I can, come up with some cool 3D models, we'll buy a 3D printer and we'll like actually make them. And it's like one of my, I don't know what you call it. It's a thing that I know that we need to do is just constantly have something that you're learning, right? So a lot of the stuff in my business, we've got really solid, and I've got really good stuff going on there, but there's not a lot of learning opportunities with what we're doing, right? Because it's very systematized at this point.
Right.
So it's just repeating the same thing. So I've always got like something extra on the outside. I'm like, okay, what are we learning here? And, because they always have to work that muscle.
Right.
And, that's where you get into doing things like learning new investment strategies and bring them up businesses into new areas, but there should always be something that you're learning. So anyways, I completely agree.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times that sort of mindset people look at as, oh, you're scattered or you're ADHD or I've heard that before, and I kind of get down on myself. And then I realize, you know what, okay, so maybe I am, but it is the thing that takes me in all of these directions. I never stop learning. And I've worked with, investment groups with very seasoned investors who've been doing, for example, multifamily for many, many years. And I'll hear about something, I'll research it and bring it to them, a new opportunity, a new way to manage the money. And they've never heard of it before. So I just think that honoring that need, and even if it's just for being creative, learn how to draw or take a YouTube class or whatever, but it's that mindset of, oh, I'm done. I'm all done learning. I've got everything that I need to know is really debilitating. And I think it rapidly ages us.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine being done, because there's like, and the other thing too, is like, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything. And it's a weird paradox.
Right.
But it's absolutely true, right? Because, and you to the whole point of being ADHD or scattered, or one of those things, at least for me, one of the things that helps me with that is, I realize that the exercises I'm going through are specifically for the joy of learning, not for becoming the best, right? I'm not looking to become a concert pianist or a professional artist or, set up a 3D printing manufacturing facility or any of those things. They're just fun exercises, on the side to just stay engaged and to have things that you're doing with your kids and your family, and your business the same way. Like, you should have the things that you're focused on, that your business is delivering, and get really, really good at those. Right. And, get to the point where you're world class. And, it's one of those things that takes years to get world class at something. Once you have that, that's great. And you should always continue to iterate on those, but there'll always be small iterations once you become world class. And so your big opportunities to learn things are going to be in other spheres. And that's where you get paradigm shifting things that happen in your businesses when you bring stuff from other spheres that you're learning and pull them into your main core, if that makes sense.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the flip side then of your superpower, which is, of course, the fatal flaw. And just like every Superman has his kryptonite, or Wonder Woman can't remove her bracelets of victory without going mad, you probably have a flaw that's held you back in your business, something you struggled with. For me, it was a couple of things. Early in my entrepreneur career, it was perfectionism, which kept me from actually shipping product, right? I could always tweak it just a little bit more instead of actually bringing it to market. Or lack of self-care, which I struggled with for a long time, which was something that I let my clients walk all over me because I didn't have good boundaries, right? And I didn't know how to set good boundaries with my clients, or how to actually sleep at night. There was a whole bunch of problems I had to self-care, learned how to take care of a lot of those things. But I think more important than the flaw is how have you worked to overcome it, so the people who are listening might learn a little bit from your experience.
Right. So I talk a lot about in my show, the opening question I always have is I ask about your money culture, what you grew up in, and how it shaped you as it pertains to money, because it affects us for the rest of our lives. And it's a very interesting conversation. Not a single person that I've asked that question to has answered it in the past. But for me, my money culture, not necessarily how I grew up, but because of the things that I experienced by losing everything twice, I have a deep fear that lives deep inside of me. And what I've decided to do is, rather than just overcoming it or ignoring it or trying to change it, is to accept it and to fold it into my life. It's there. I've now acknowledged it. I also acknowledge that it's not necessarily a fact all the time. It's just a feeling. But this is a really universal flaw. And I think it it could pertain to anything. It could be money, relationships, jobs, anything, parenting, etc. But that fear bleeds into self-doubt and everything else. And it's more comforting to let it paralyze us, because that's where we go. And that's what fear does to us. So for me, it's been kind of like pulling that skeleton out of the closet, bringing it out, putting a party hat on it, putting it on the couch, and like fear is invited to the party, and I'm terrified. We're going through a transaction right now. And as it pertains to money, I still have fear. My husband does not suffer from this money culture issue. He has a different money culture, but we talk about it on a daily basis. I'm feeling sick. I'm feeling insecure. I'm feeling this, whatever it is. But despite now, fear is kind of my co-pilot. Like, she's there. There ain't nothing I can do about it. She's neurotic and she's coming along, but she's not going to decide how we make what are the moves that we're going to make to move forward. But recognizing that fatal flaw is really important. Another one, it's not mine, but I just want to touch on it, is when folks tie their relationship with money to their identity. So if it's important to me to have a fancy car and a nice house or whatever, to my own detriment, doing some examination around that, because that is not taking care of yourself at all. It's sabotaging yourself. So I don't have any of that, but I live well below my means, and I always have. It's a little bit moving into this new world where I'm kind of like, oh, wait, I don't have to, I don't have to be so frugal all the time. I actually can go ahead and spend this kind of money. But yeah, short answer, fear.
I love the description too of the money culture. And I know it's something that my wife and I have dealt with a lot, because she grew up very poor. And I grew up upper middle class because my dad worked his ass off to do what he did. And, he started off poor. And by the time, I remember most of life, we were doing pretty well. And by the time I graduated high school, he's doing pretty well. He's retired well and all that kind of stuff. So I have, and I had the other interesting tidbit of, like, my dad put the Rich Dad books in my hand when I was like 9 years old.
Wow.
So I had a pretty good, like middle class employee mindset about money. And then I started learning from Robert Kiyosaki and Donald Trump and some other people that I was reading their books, like Art of the Deal and stuff, when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. So I had a very interesting relationship with money. And it has turned, like, my money culture has sort of become it's a tool. Right. And I've never really been afraid of it. And I've always been, I think if there was a flaw side of that, it's that, like, I always want to have whatever the best thing is.
Yeah.
Right. Where like, if there's a choice between two hammers and one of them is $2 and one of them is $5, I'll buy the $5 one.
Right. And your wife growing up poor probably has the totally opposite feeling.
Yeah. She's like, she would rather buy the $2 hammer 5 times than buy the $5 hammer once.
Exactly.
And so we struggle with that a little bit. But as the one of the things that I've found interesting is, like, what I've been working on, like, personally with my relationship with money is, I figure this is like my ladder for success, is how much money do I not have before I don't have to, like, consider it a decision. And so what I mean by that is, like, if I go to Walmart and I buy a widget, and I take it home and it doesn't work, right? How much money before I don't care that it didn't work, and I'll just move on with my life, versus going through the process of having to refund it, like go back and get it returned and work done. And I remember when we first started off our marriage, we were very poor. And it was like, if it was $1, we'd go back and return it. Yeah. And, you get to the point where it's, it's $10, $50, $100, $500. And you're like, if it's a $500 investment, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, it's not a big deal. And you just move on.
Right.
And because you realize, the experience and other things they're just worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of been my measure of, like, okay, I want to get that number to the point where I can buy a sailboat.
Right.
If I don't like it, I just buy a different sailboat. It's not there yet, but eventually that's how I always thought about that.
Right. Oh, that's funny. That's a good way to measure it. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason I say the sailboat is we were at a boat show a number of years ago in San Diego, which is, very near all of the very wealthy movie stars and whatnot. And I was talking to one of the yacht brokers, and I was like, so what is it like selling yachts in this price range? He's like, either we sell to normal people like you, or we sell to crazy people who come in and they're like, they buy yachts the way that you buy socks at Walmart. Right? He's like, do you want the black ones and the white ones? They're like, I'll take both, try them for a week, and whatever I don't like the other one, I'll just give it to a friend. And like, that's
that's the reality. Isn't that
that's
crazy?
the reality. Yeah.
It's insane. There's only a very, very small percentage of the world like that. But when you float in those circles, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So, apparently being a yacht broker, you meet those people.
Yeah.
So, which I could imagine is kind of fun. So I want to talk then about your common enemy. And your common enemy it'll be interesting for this conversation because generally we put it in the context of your clients, but every superhero has an arch nemesis. And it's a thing that they constantly have to fight against in their world, right? And in the world of business, it takes on a lot of forms, but generally speaking, we put it in the context of your clients. And for this, why don't we put it in the context of like your listeners and the people that you work with on your podcast and your show and teaching them about investing. And it's a mindset or it's a flaw that you constantly have to fight to overcome so that the people who are listening to you and learning from you can actually get the results that they came to you for, right? What is that arch nemesis that you're constantly having to fight against?
It's self-doubt. So it's everything from I'm not smart enough to do this. I'm not brave enough to do this. I am afraid to leave my marriage because I'll be lost. I'm afraid to get married because I will lose something. I'm afraid to buy my first home. I'm afraid to make my first investment. And it all comes down to who they are and their own valuation and self-doubt. And so how I help people with that, because I suffer from that too, of course, is, just tools that I've used over the years. And they are tools that have, like, I always call it moving the needle. There's a reason it's called micro empires. It's micro risks. And, everything is done in small chunks, because that's how I could manage my relationship with money, my fear, and my learning curve, and my own self-doubt. Was to go into it slowly. So the way I help people is, there's something that I do. I go live as if. So when you're going into an environment and you want to become a real estate investor, well, if you own a home, then you already are a real estate investor. It's okay to live as if you already have millions of listeners and thousands of followers and a multi-million-dollar business. It doesn't mean fake it. But it does mean tell the true story. I'm building this business. This is who I am. I am an investor, and believing in who that is, and believing that you are smart enough and curious enough to get the information that you need to squash that self-doubt. But a lot of it just comes from deep, deep, deep within, the simplest of things. And it is the thing over and over and over again that I talk to people about every day.
And it's such an interesting thing too. I love the concept of having the small things that you can take control of and move forward, and just the small risks that you can take to manage them. Because we all have our self-doubts, and we all have the problems, with trying to come up with things. I've wanted to get into the real estate business for years, but I've always been like, I want to build my business to a point where it's like throwing off the cash flow that I can invest in real estate. It's not like really, it's just like a side thing. So I made that decision consciously. But there's always that part of me is like, am I making that decision constantly, or am I afraid of it?
Yeah.
Right. And I always have to examine that and make sure that no, I'm still doing what I want to be doing. But it's an interesting thing. And I like the thought too of learning how to live as if. Mm-hmm. And we hear all the time, people always tell you to fake it till you make it. And I've always hated that saying, but the underlying concept, is really, really powerful, because you are not what you think, you are how you act.
Right.
Your actions define who you are. Right. And I always like to tell people, I was like, if someone could read my mind, I'd probably be in prison. But that's not right. And that's probably true for everyone.
Oh, that's funny.
But you're not judged by how you think. You're judged by how you act, by what you do. And so learning to act as if, is just, it's a matter of like learning how to, your lifestyle follows your actions. It's not the other way around.
Right.
So to act as if is, that's where that whole thing of buying the $5 hammer came from in my life. I was like, a wealthy person would buy the $5 hammer because that's the one that they would buy. And so even when I was broke and young and an early entrepreneur, I was like, I'm going to act as if I'm a wealthy person and buy the $5 hammer. And for the project I'm working on, even if it takes me 3 weeks to save up for the $5 hammer, that's the way that even if that's flawed, I don't know if that's true or not, but in my head, that's what I thought wealthy people would do. So I was acting the way a wealthy person would act, which was buy the $5 hammer. And so anyways, I really like that. It's one of the ways I've run my life is learning to act as if I am where I want to be.
One of the greatest exercises that I've done, and it really works, although, I'm sort of a very, very, very pragmatic, practical person. And so when I hear something like a vision board, I'm like, oh God, my eyes roll and I'm like, please give me a break. However, I have several times, I do it on a whiteboard and I map out the mission, whatever it is. So it might be at one point I had one that I still have it. It says home, work, and love. And so it was about creating a home, creating work, and finding love. And I wrote it all out on a whiteboard, put it up on my wall. And it was as if. And I saw it every day. And then you stop seeing it every day because it's there every day. And literally like within a year, well, no, that's not true. I mean, in a year, certainly some of it came true. But as I look back now on that board, everything that I wrote down was achieved. And that is about living as if. So it can be a small thing, like writing yourself a sticky note saying, I am wealthy. I deserve this, that, whatever it is. When I first started doing real estate investing, I had bought my home and I found about a real estate investor network group and I went to it. And the first night I went, it was like 500 people and it was so intimidating. And they were all speaking a language I didn't speak, but it was also exciting. I felt like I had landed, I call it swimming in the pool. I was in the right pool and I was swimming, but I was swimming with all Olympic athletes. And I'm like in my floaties, just trying to keep up, but I'm in the right pool. I mean, that's better than most people. You're across the field. You can't even see the pool. So I knew I was in the right pool. So I went home. They had a meeting once a month. I went home. I had business cards made up, black business card, had my name on the front. On the back, it said investor, entrepreneur. Here's my phone number. That's it. No email, nothing. So I had something to hand out. And I'm like, yeah, I'm an investor. I own a house. I'm investing right now. And it was just learning by fire. If anybody asked me, well, what do you own? What do you invest in? Of course, I tell the truth. But that's how I had to learn. I mean, I went out with wholesalers and banged on doors. I did all the things till I figured out what my personality type and who I am as an individual would do well in. And it is not door knocking and it is not flips and it is not rehabs. It's none of those things. But living like that was really important. And then as I started to build my portfolio of Airbnbs, which I did just by moving into them, which is something you might consider. So I'd buy a house and move into it for 3%, live in it for 6 months, set it up as an Airbnb and leave and do it again and do it again and do it again. So it's house hacking. But once I started to, a year into being with this
that might
group,
be genius.
Thank you. Once I started, because it's only, anyway, we could talk about that. Once I started doing that, because we would stand up in this group and introduce ourselves, I'd stand up and I'm like, I'm Jennifer. I have 4 single family homes, 3 of which are Airbnbs. I'm investing in this. And people were like, oh my God, you're a guru. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm somebody who's moved 6 times in 18 months. It's not fun. I have a job on top of it all. It was hard. I got comfortable being uncomfortable. But, that is a perfect example of how you all could begin this journey. I would say, not that you asked me, but I'm going to say it anyway. Since you are thinking about real estate, there's no reason you have to stop what you're doing and refocus on something else. You can put your toe in the water. You can take a micro risk. You can make a small investment and see how it goes, see how it makes you feel, see what tax benefits it brings you. There's lots of different ways.
That's genius. We may have to talk more about that after the interview.
Thank you. I thought it was genius too.
Yeah. And I really like the concept of dipping your toe into things. That's how um, I tell people I've been running my business for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years now. But honestly, it's changed and shifted a lot. Because what I would do is, like, I had really strict rules for me and my best friend. We started in 2007 together, so however long that's been. We dropped out of college on the same day because we're going to get into business, and we sat down.
Podcasting?
No,
Okay.
it's shifted a lot. It's been in business and marketing the whole time, and it's just gotten very narrow into podcasting over the years. But and he's in a different space. He's in the real estate marketing space. But so we sort of grew our businesses parallel. But we both had very similar rules that we set up for ourselves, and it was time freedom and location freedom and some other things that we wanted to have. Like, our business let us do those things, and so we'd go down a path a little bit. And, like your example of door knocking, you realize, that one's violating some of our rules. And we pull back and we go a different direction a little bit, and we go down and sometimes, like, the money was good in some areas and we'd stop anyways. Because I was like, we had our lifestyle goals that we wanted to build. And I wasn't looking to build a business that changed the world like Apple Computer or something. I was looking to build a lifestyle business. And so I knew what those rules were. Took more than 10 years to get there, but just by acting as if, essentially, and going down those paths and testing things out really allowed us to get where we wanted to go with our businesses.
Right. And I would say anybody the other part of it was, I was so motivated to learn the lesson, whatever the lesson was that I had to learn it. And I was willing to clear everything off my plate to learn it. So during those years of building that business, I wasn't in a relationship. I wasn't, you know what I mean? Like, I had a full-time job, and I had this other side business that I didn't even know I was building, but I was building, and I just knew it was going to work. And it was before Airbnb. People were like, "What is that? What do you mean people are staying at your house? That's crazy." And I was like, crazy, but 6 nights a month pays my mortgage. So, okay.
It works for me.
Works for me. And I was buying in rough neighborhoods. I was doing all the things that people were like, "What's a nice girl like you doing stuff like that?" And I was like, a nice girl like me doesn't want to end up with no job, no car, no money, no place to live, and 2 kids ever again. But if where you are, you're just so grounded in your family and your comfort level and what you're doing. And this just actually is another opportunity perhaps to, build wealth and have some fun and get in an industry that you like. There's a good and bad side of Airbnb. I could go on and on forever. I actually sold all of the properties 30 days before COVID hit. So I got out of Airbnb entirely of that business. I might go back into it in another market, but probably not in Nashville.
What's interesting to me is I got another friend of mine who does Airbnb, and he had all the properties at the beginning of COVID, and it was a nightmare for several months. And now he's so booked he can't even see straight.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And that's true. And if I'd hung on to them, it would be fine now. But those 8, 9 months, 10 months in between, I would have been miserable. And and my carrying cost was $7,000 a month. And I would have been making my husband crazy. And it was just better. It's just what I needed to do. And I wanted to do more in multifamily, more investing, passive investing, because that's by trial and error and going over and over. What I've realized is that being a passive investor is what I really like to do.
So I would like to get to the point where I got the cash flow for that, because I've looked at some of the numbers on the passive investing, where you're working with someone who's putting deals together. Mm-hmm. And you put up the 500,000 or whatever that they need to reposition the property. And you get a 10% equity stake in the property, and you get a 10% cash flow for the whole period until they get to the reposition. When they do the cash flow refinance, you get another 10% windfall of cash. And then, when they sell the property, you get the 10% again. And it's like, you can turn that $500,000 investment into $1.5 million over the course of 4 or 5 years. And you got your cash on cash return back in 18 months. So you can put it back into another project that they're doing. And it's insane. And your work on that is nothing. It's just putting up the money.
It's money. But, and that's important to say, because I think so that's exactly what I do right now. And I also work with other investors to kind of, just show them the opportunities that I'm going into. But you don't need $500,000. You typically need 100. Some will do 50. It depends on what kind of investor you are. And that's kind of my point. The comfort level really is whatever the dollar amount is, whether it's 50 or 100, whatever it is, you got to be comfortable saying goodbye to it for a few years, even if you're getting your cash on, your returns, your cash flow during the years. Like, it's not going to be a ton of money coming in. It's the equity play. But the one thing you didn't talk about is the huge tax benefit that also comes, which is I don't know what the tax
benefits are. I've never done that. I've never done it. So I just conceptually, I understand how it works, but I've never done it. So I don't really know what the tax shelter stuff is on the other side. I'd be interested if you're curious to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, as an investor, so I'm on the investor end, I'm not on the GP end, but there's cost segregation and bonus depreciation, et cetera. These are all tax laws that are available. So let me back up a bit. We have owned an apartment complex ourselves straight out and have a management company in there. We did something called cost segregation and bonus depreciation, which basically gave us a huge tax cut, which we applied and were able to apply very, very quickly, versus what the law used to be. It took 27 years. We are getting out of that hands-on business, and now we are taking that money and redeploying it as investors in different multifamily opportunities. So last year, I made an investment in 67 doors in Knoxville, Tennessee. Last week, I made another investment in 128 doors in Chattanooga. And it's exactly as you describe it. So that $100,000, which, by the way, it's not like I can write a check for $100,000. I can use a tool called a self-directed IRA. You can use your old 401k. There are a lot of ways to do that.
You can put it in, one of my favorites is, I got a friend of mine who does this. You take that money and it's in a whole life insurance policy that's earning like 6 or 8% annually. And it's coming out as a loan. So the cash flow pays the interest back in the equity position. So you're actually like stacking your interest.
That's exactly right. So whole life
wealthy people play.
That's what this show is about. So I have an episode on whole life insurance, and that's exactly one. Another one is called a first position HELOC, when you own a home.
Yeah.
And you do the same thing. So the idea, and I understand this for anybody, like, I'm talking about, it's only 100,000. Like, that's not, I'm not a complete jerk. Like, I know that's a huge number, but when I learned while I was still working a job and had just gotten into Airbnb through my real estate group, that I could take my 401k and put it in a vehicle where I could invest in real estate. I quit my job to get the 401k out. Now, granted, I don't like the job anyway. I got another job, but I got that money out so I could start using it to invest in real estate. And that's what I've done. And I've grown it there. And then there are other vehicles. But my point is, so it's very intimidating to say, okay, and it depends on the operators. That's really the trouble. The trouble is to find people that like, and trust, and who you can work with. That is the most important thing, more than anything, more than the deal, more than anything. Who do you know, like, and trust? Trust actually coming first. But this is exactly, I'll walk through the Chattanooga deal. It's an $8 million property. We did a $2.6 million raise. The minimum was about $100,000. But if you do $100,000, you're getting basically a 6% return. And then, but an expected 1.6 when it sells out. So you will triple your money by the time you're done. Now, by the time you're done, won't be, with real estate, you need to plan at least 3 to 5 years. But also during that time, you're getting all of the tax benefits. And that comes with, you just have to have yourself a really experienced CPA who understands real estate.
Yeah. It's fascinating too. It's an entirely different game that you play once you get to that level. And that's where I was like, I know in my business, that's sort of my next goal, is to take the cash flow that the business generates and start putting it into those things. Because everything I do in my business, even as systematized as I've made it, it's still an active business, right? It's like, if I went away, in a few years, the business would die.
Right.
So I'd like to get it to a point where it would continue to grow without me, but we're not there yet. But anyways, I know that's sort of is, take the business, build, if you're Robert Kiyosaki, the B quadrant, use the cash flow to get into the I quadrant. So,
and I know you've interviewed a few of my friends, but one is Billy Keels. I know you interviewed him recently.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. And he lives in Barcelona. He has a full-time corporate job and he does investments as well. And his types of investments that he raises money for are not necessarily real estate, but there are lots of things out there that once you have, like, let's say you have an old 401k with 200,000 and you convert it to something that you can use to invest. It's just sitting there and you're just looking for ideas of where to put this money. And it's just going to sit there anyway. And it's not accruing much interest. So there are lots of opportunities, but it's really about understanding and opening the doors, be willing to learn and knowing that you belong there. Like that's the other thing that's very intimidating. Folks think, oh, it's only if you're super wealthy or whatever. And it's not true. You belong there. You act as if, because you do belong there. Everybody does.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was a good discussion. Normally I have a section of the show called the Hero's Tool Belt where we talk about some practical things, but I think that's pretty much covers some practical things you could do with your finances and whatnot.
And now, a quick word from our show's sponsor. Hey there, fellow podcaster. Having a weekly audio and video show on all the major online networks that builds your brand, creates fame, and drives sales for your business doesn't have to be hard. I know it feels that way because you've tried managing your show internally and realize how resource intensive it can be. You felt the pain of pouring 8 to 10 hours of work into just getting 1 hour of content published and promoted all over the place. You see the drain on your resources, but you do it anyways because you know how powerful it is. Heck, you've probably even tried some of those automated solutions and ended up with stuff that makes your brand look cheesy and cheap. That's not helping grow your business. Don't give up though. The struggle ends now. Introducing Push Button Podcasts, a done-for-you service that will help you get your show out every single week without you lifting a finger after you've pushed that stop record button. We handle everything else: uploading, editing, transcribing, writing, research, graphics, publication, and promotion, all done by real humans who know, understand, and care about your brand almost as much as you do. Empowered by our own proprietary technology, our team will let you get back to doing what you love while we handle the rest. Check us out at pushbuttonpodcast.com/hero for 10% off the lifetime of your service with us and see the power of having an audio and video podcast growing and driving micro celebrity status and business in your niche without you having to lift more than a finger to push that stop record button. Again, that's pushbuttonpodcast.com/hero. See you there. And now, back to the Hero Show.
I want to talk a little about your own personal heroes, right? So, everyone has their mentors, just like Frodo had Gandalf, or Luke had Obi-Wan Kenobi, or, like we mentioned, Robert Kiyosaki had his rich dad, or Spider-Man who had Uncle Ben. Who are some of your heroes? Were they real-life mentors, speakers, or authors maybe, peers who are a couple of years ahead of you? And how important were they to what you've accomplished so far?
I think my real-life mentors are the folks that I saw just continuing to choose to be happy no matter how hard their lives were. And that was a real testimony to me. So a lot of that stems around poverty. When you're either poor or you're living in financial chaos is another way that I put it. But you meet folks that are just still choosing happiness, still choosing to live life and to enjoy life. So that was really important to me. As far as famous people, certainly this is so cliche, but I'm definitely going to have to quote, Oprah. Oprah saved my life when I was going through my first divorce and absolutely terrified and didn't know where to go or what to do. And like many people, at 3:00 every afternoon, this is before internet, before everything, I would watch her on TV, and Maya Angelou came on and said, lessons will continue to be taught until they are learned. And I was eating this, I remember I was eating a chicken sandwich. I stopped in the middle of the chew and went, oh my God, I'm going to marry the same person. I'm going to make the same mistakes, and I'm going to end up in the same place if I don't learn this lesson. And that was my first step of, this is a lesson that I have to learn. It's not going to get better if I don't learn it. And then I think along the way, just all of the people that I followed, Jen Sincero and Gavin DeBecker and Chris Voss, it's sort of a plethora of people. Robert Kiyosaki, definitely a mindset shift, but it wasn't just about money. It was really about discovering who I am and knowing what my needs were on every level, and then being able to communicate that without flinching. and without feeling bad about taking my space and taking my place. So I can't point to one person, but that's what they would look like.
What's interesting to me is I also remember where I was at the first time I heard someone say lesson repeated until lesson learned. And I was sitting in a network marketing like a meeting, and the guy's name was Larry, and he's standing up and he's talking, and I was in a college kid at the time and wanted to get into this whole world of business and thought network marketing would be a great way to start. And I remember he was sitting there and he just, to the whole audience, and he said, lesson repeated until lesson learned. And I was like, I don't remember anything about that, like almost nothing from the entire experience for years that I can like really, really concretely say impacted my life. But hearing him say that one thing, it's like shifted everything for me. Because you realize it's like, hey, you have to learn the lesson before you move on.
Yeah.
And the hardest part sometimes is you don't know what the lesson is, or where, because you don't know what you don't know. Right. And sometimes you just have to hit your head on the wall a few times until you realize what's going on.
Right.
But that willingness to make the mistakes and to analyze them and to learn the lessons and move forward is like, that's how you grow. That's how you create the snowball effect in your life.
Yep. Exactly.
Awesome. So I want to talk about one more thing, which is your guiding principles, right? And so one of the things that makes heroes heroic is that they live by a code. For instance, Batman never kills his enemies. He only ever brings them to Arkham Asylum. So as we wrap up the interview, I want to talk about maybe one or two principles that you live your life by. Maybe something you wish you had known when you started out on your own hero's journey all those years ago.
These are just so easy questions. They're like huge. Someone asked me the other day on a show I was on what the meaning of life was. And I hadn't been asked that before. And I hadn't really 42. Yeah. And I hadn't really thought about it. But I think this is the same. For me, it's my guiding. I think I've been living this truth, but I hadn't put it into words until a few days ago. But I think the meaning of life and my guiding principle is impact. I want to have a positive impact. And I think it's the most important thing that any one of us can do. And some people are like Oprah and they have a huge platform and they can impact, lots and lots of people. And then there are other people who, I have many stories, and I'm sure that you do. And every listener you have has the story like this of somebody, a complete stranger, who said something to you one day that completely impacted you for the rest of your life. So I think my goal is to try to have a positive impact on everybody, every person that I touch in some way, because what is the purpose of anything if I'm not doing that? And I really only surround myself. That's another key part. And it is a guiding principle. I don't waste my time. I don't fill the space with people who aren't, swimming in the same pool. Just got to keep up. That doesn't mean that you abandon your friends who have a different mindset or whatever. But I only surround myself with really quality people and really people who are learning and striving for better. So I think those are my guiding principles.
Yeah. And I know I have a similar one that I follow called that I say is to leave it better than you found it. Similar to impact, right? Where, everything from, people you meet, if you leave a smile on their face, you've left them better than you found them, to
That's right.
When we go to campsites, we make sure they're cleaner than when we got there, and national parks and everything. And like my kids are the crazy kids on the beach who are like cleaning up after other people.
Right.
Right. But it's an impact thing. We want the impact on our world to be a positive one. And so we everything we do is all sort of geared towards, leaving a better world behind.
Absolutely. And it's just as easy to be nice. It's easier to be nice than it is to be mean or any other negative emotion.
Yeah.
Like it's much easier to do that.
Absolutely. Well, that is basically a wrap on our interview, Jennifer. I really appreciate you coming on. But I do have one final thing that I do at the end of all of my shows. It's a simple challenge that I call the Heroes Challenge. And it's a selfish thing, right? I do it to get access to stories I might not otherwise find on my own. So the question is simple. Do you have someone in your network that you think has a cool entrepreneurial story? Who are they? First names are fine. And why do you think they should come share their story on our show? First person that comes to mind for you.
The first person that comes to mind for me is Mignon Francois, and she is the founder of the Cupcake Collection here in Nashville, Tennessee. She was one of my very first guests. She is phenomenal. She started with $5 and in her home with no electricity and built a multi-million-dollar cupcake business. And
Wow.
she is a walking, talking testimony to love and light and joy. And before I got to meet her, I used to go down to her little house, her little cupcake house where she was making them. And I'd buy a cupcake because it's all I could afford. And just the joy that I felt in that environment impacted me. So she was one of my first guests, and she's a hero to me for sure.
Absolutely. We'll reach out later and see if we can get an introduction, maybe get her on the show. They don't always say yes, but we always try to get cool people on.
Yeah, understood.
So in comic books, there's always the crowd of people at the end who cheer and clap for the acts of heroism. So our analogous to that as we close is, where can people find you if they want to learn from you? Where can they light up the bat signal, so to speak, and say, hey, Jennifer, I'd love to learn a little bit more about micro empires and getting that kind of stuff going in my life. And I think more importantly than where is, who are the right types of people to reach out and maybe listen or to learn from you?
Yeah. I love for people to listen to the podcast. So you can get it anywhere you can find podcasts, and it's Micro Empires. My website is micro-empires.com. On there, if you want to schedule time to talk to me, I have a Calendly that you can fill out and I'll spend time with you. I have a guest intake form and also an investor intake form, just for people, really just anybody who's interested, because you got to start somewhere. The right person to reach out to me is really anybody who's trying to figure out, the next real move in their life, whether that's financial or otherwise. But I tend to work with folks who are kind of have everything in the right spot, but they just don't know how to take the next step. Or a lot of people identify with being at the place where I lost everything and how to begin again. And I have episodes that go through every single detail. It's one of the things on my show. I share all of my numbers. I don't make it vague. I make it very specific. I ask all of my guests to be very specific. So there's no fuzz. There's no blur on the screen. So you can understand exactly what it is that you're getting.
Absolutely. So, that is basically a wrap. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jennifer. If you are in that spot where you want to look and learn a little bit about building micro empires, definitely check out the show. I'm going to be checking out the show. I didn't know you had it. I was like, just reading through your bio, I was like, oh, this is like my kind of information. So I'm looking forward to hearing that. But Jennifer, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have any final words of wisdom for my audience before I hit this stop record button?
Thank you very much for having me, and don't abandon yourself, because you are a superhero in your own life.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jennifer.